All right, friends, today we're going to be talking about the King of Lights meeting the Prince of Darkness. Yes, Sun conjunct Pluto in the sign of Aquarius at 3 degrees. And I want to say at the beginning, we're going to increase the aperture on how we talk about transits because we can't just look at this in terms of individuals. It's about the relationship between individuals to systems. And when we bring Pluto into the picture, we're talking about confrontation with systems. And the sun itself is an organizing principle as the center of our solar system, which organizes everything around it. It's giving everything a sense of coherence. It's a function that holds the identity of our lives together. It's giving us our identity, and in that sense, is creating a sense of continuity through that coherence. So the sun is always denoting a stable reference point. Pluto, on the other hand, operates in a very different way. Pluto works with survival forces, power dynamics, and it's about eliminative pressure. So when Sun meets Pluto, what comes into question, that's why we're saying we have to increase the aperture, is not about how we feel. It's whether our center, the organizing principle in our lives, can actually endure the kind of pressure and force that Pluto brings into it. Pluto brings pressure on our roles, on our sense of authority, in how we lead, and the legitimacy of our power. Now, there's another reason why this conjunction of Sun is specifically important this year, because Pluto and Sun meet every year. And that's because first we had Venus inaugurating this whole process, and then Mercury, and now the Sun, and then after that it will be Mars. And with Venus, Pluto was showing us our relational power dynamics in our intimate bonds and what we value. And with Mercury, it was involving the intellect. We need to understand how we think about power. That power of discernment was being challenged by Pluto when Mercury conjuncted. So now when the sun moves in, Pluto starts challenging our identity and our sense of self, the authority of the self. And again, since the sun represents that center where the entire system is organized around it, Pluto will challenge how we stand at the center of our lives and how other things are orbiting it. And Pluto wants to systematically dismantle anything that claims to be powerful and yet inherently it does not have power. And Pluto doesn't do this all at once. It's one layer at a time. That's why it takes such a long time to go through a sign. So what we see this year during this transit is just another layer of it. And with the sun here, it becomes an excavation process of ourselves, centers of authority, leaders. Pluto's trying to reveal hidden powers that can't just operate from that hidden place anymore. Pluto is going to show us where our authority is borrowed. And it's also important to say something about Aquarius from the outset. It's a sign that represents collective intelligence. It's an air sign, so it's super intelligent. It's about group identity, loyalty to a principle. And that's because it's a fixed sign. So when it has an idea, it can easily turn into an ideology and it becomes fixated on that. Aquarius can stabilize ideas by systemizing them and then making an entire system out of it. Pluto, on the other hand, does not negotiate with systems because if you think about it, a system requires these connective networks that are cooperative on some level. Pluto is anything but cooperative. Pluto is just going to come to test those systems. It wants to show us what actually deserves continuing in its existence. So the question of this transit is not so much about what's changing, but what cannot continue in its current form. Pluto is showing us what has to be transformed, where the transformation is actually denoting the death of the previous form. And to understand all of this, we have to begin in the dark, talking about the Prince of Darkness. But before going there, there will be other videos coming up about this Aquarius saga. And if you guys are interested in seeing those videos, please do remember to subscribe so YouTube sends you a notification. And you can also go to parisayazdi.com. There will be an article related to this video. Now, without further ado, let's dive into the darkness and see how we are pulled in it while we expand the aperture. And I want us to remember when the sun meets Pluto, one of the first things that will happen internally, and we can sense it on an individual and a social level, there's a lot of anxiety about power. And a lot of this anxiety is related to the way that we're becoming aware of hidden powers, covert powers, not the visible ones that declare themselves as the authority, rather the puppeteers in the background controlling the scene and the narrative. So the anxiety is appearing because the so-called centers, we who think we are at the center and at the helm of our own lives, we start to realize, oh my God, I am not the sovereign of my own life. I'm not the sovereign of my own nation. And all of these dynamics are related to the interaction of these two planets. Because naturally, what the sun should be doing, as mentioned earlier, it should be indicating coherence. It should be showing how systems are organized around it. But Pluto here is introducing an opposing force. And that force is the question, what Pluto wants to do, question the legitimacy of that center. It wants to show that it's not real, or which parts of it is not real. And this is where that dark psychology begins. And I'm saying dark because when coherence gets threatened, usually, systems don't just collapse immediately. What happens is that they begin to defend themselves. Same thing happens to us. We make a statement, we're showing our authority, and then someone says something that questions our authority. One of the first things we'll do is defend ourselves. And in the case of right now, defense takes a particular kind of form, the way that it's coming about, the way we and society is defending itself. We can see that there's a lot of control being exerted through moralization of things. Like, these people are evil, that person's evil. Another form of it will come through control, through silence. We're seeing this in Iran, the blackout of the internet. Silence everyone's voice and just control the narrative. We can also see this control coming through ideological purity. Why something should exist on that ideological level. And we have to remember all of this is occurring in the sign of Aquarius. So these power dynamics, these power struggles are going to be happening inside groups, alliances, coalitions, movements, institutions, and networks that claim to be principled or humanitarian or rational. And we're seeing that in the political sphere. Everyone's making a case for themselves in terms of how this is the right principle to live by. This is what's humanitarian. But right now, and for a long time to come, Pluto is going to be exposing where such claims are being used as leverage. That's what I mean about covert power, to control the narrative. This transit will reveal coercive leadership that's hiding behind neutrality, enforced consensus that's disguised as objectivity, emotional suppression that's framed as intelligence. Everyone right now wants to test everyone's loyalty because of that fixed nature of Aquarius, masquerading as morality and ethics. But Pluto is creating constant confrontation because it wants us to see the cost of repression, erasure, and quiet domination. Pluto is going to continuously amp up its power, its pressure and its tension, its stress testing until all of this surfaces. And when you think about it, we can see why this type of a transit can be related to purges on an individual and a collective level. And that's because it's exposing hierarchies. And none of this is random. Because this is right now the individual and the collective psyche reacting to the loss of uncontested authority. Why do some people have so much authority? What is this for? Where is this coming from? Who are they representing? So a part of Pluto's work right now is to show where authority is not legitimate. And once when that process begins and that revelation comes, something has to be removed. And Pluto's always exposing something because his intent at the end is to eliminate it. So let's just take a minute to talk about this purge itself, because I think it's important. It's part of a big component of what Pluto is about. And the first thing that we have to do is to put this into context of the sign, because Pluto's in the sign of Aquarius. And Aquarius could be one of the least emotional signs. It's very cerebral and intellectual. So it's not the purging of emotions. Pluto wants to purge networks of the system, even the system itself, that can no longer sustain life. At the end of the day, this is worth saying, no matter how malefic the planet is, the planet exists in existence. They are at the service of existence, even if they destroy, even when they kill. So Pluto is not exempt from this either. So yes, Pluto might destroy many things, but the ultimate objective is to maintain existence, and life is an expression of that. And when it comes into the sign of Aquarius, what's being eliminated in a brutal way right now is our collective agreements. And these can include ideas that just continuously repeat in a repetitive way. They don't actually hold the truth, but we take them to be truth because they're just constantly repeating over time. So we just take it as a matter of fact. Pluto wants to challenge that. Pluto wants to show group identities that hold their power by silencing others, rendering others as invisible. And Aquarius is a very humanitarian sign. And when a planet goes into a sign, they get the script from the sign and they have to obey. So these are the types of power and power dynamics that Pluto is challenging. Pluto wants to expose intellectual systems that punish any kind of a viewpoint that falls outside the purview of its own discourse. Intellectual systems that claim openness, but is full of bigotry, racism, and every other kind of ism that you can think of. Generally, networks that are held together by fear rather than shared purpose. Aquarius at its highest level actually wants that. And the sun being here is telling us that we're not actually dealing with abstractions the way you could in the sign of Aquarius. It's personalizing them. It's not things that are happening in the periphery. It's the things that determine our own identity. You know, when you think about it, you can't violate other nations thinking that's so far from me. We might be able to benefit from it, but we're not going to get the consequences of it. This Pluto dynamic violates that common thinking, that repetitive thinking that's become the truth. So even though Pluto and the sign of Aquarius don't operate on a personal level, in this moment, this act of purging might actually become a little too personal. Even though it is structural, it's coming to touch our own individual lives in some ways. And we have to remember Venus and Mercury are both our personal planets. Mars is pretty damn close. Jupiter and Saturn are so slow moving that they become more about cycles. So we can see how the impersonal is being made into something personal also. And some of the ways that these things could be experienced is that individuals on an individual level, to close that aperture a little bit, suddenly they'll find that they have lost their position in their own life, in workplace, amongst colleagues, the networks that they belong to. There can be expulsion from groups, from collectives that we've belonged to. There could be collapse of alliances right now. Like you see this again in US, to use as an example, the left and the right. People are at conflict within their own family. And when you think about it, you're talking about something that's pretty abstract and you're allowing it to touch your personal life. And there can also be a lot of dissolution with the way that we used to engage and become active in the world, in different movements, for example. Things that we really believed in, they're becoming fractured. Again, going back to the ultimate purpose of Pluto, Pluto is doing all of this because it wants to remove what feeds on life, like a parasite. It wants true power, and true power is always generative. Pluto in itself represents power, raw power. And coming down to a psychological level, this is talking about elimination of compulsive dominance, covert manipulation, and power that is about withholding rather than contributing. And we can experience this very much on an individual level with people that we know in our lives. Pluto is coming to touch that. Like, look where the sign of Aquarius is sitting in your chart. It's talking about the themes and the people of that house. And it'll do the same thing on the social level because the sign of Aquarius represents that. And talking about Aquarius, Aquarius is contributing to this process because this is a sign that wants loyalty to principles, to ideas and ideologies. And yes, Pluto is going to correspond to this sign and what this sign wants. But Pluto is always going to be Pluto. So Pluto's like, okay, fine. You want loyalty and principles? Fine. You can have it, but I'm going to test the shit out of it. I need to see where those loyalties are real. And you know, this is where a lot of people make a mistake with Pluto, misunderstand Pluto, because we think that while a purge is happening, it should be meaningful and meaningful while it's happening. With Pluto, it doesn't. During the purge, when Pluto's dismantling everything, revealing all these power dynamics in the most brutal possible way, making the personal impersonal, the impersonal into something personal, life feels destabilizing. If you've ever had Pluto go over one of your personal planets, the signification of that planet become destabilized. Things feel unjust and cruel. Life can feel cruel. Like the notion of cause and effect suddenly does not apply. Universal justice, forget about it. And again, look at the house where Pluto's sitting in right now in your chart. Those are the topics that can feel cruel and unjust. Like if it's in your second house, everything related to finances and your material security at this moment feels unjust, cruel, brutal, life denying. If it's in your seventh house, your relationships are doing that to you. Your 10th house, your career is doing it. So look at where Pluto's sitting. It's important to remember meaning when it comes to Pluto. Meaning always emerges after the purge. And then think about how long Pluto sits in a sign. So to be rendered meaningless for over a decade, it's not an easy task. What puts our life in danger often is the crisis of meaning. But this purging, the dismantling, delays meaning until the process is done. And when it's done, only what's functional remains. In this case, when we have the sun, power and authority that's functional, that's remaining, that becomes a basis for life, which can support, lead, create new ideologies. And we have to also remember when we remove something, we create a vacuum. And we have to remember that kind of a vacuum, that kind of a vacant space that's been purged, it always raises a deeper question. And when you think about a vacuum, we're talking about a sense of darkness and that cruelty that I was just talking about. It raises this question of why does this kind of a darkness in the world have to emerge at all? Why can't we just evolve gently? Why all of this force? And to answer that question, let's go a little bit deeper into what Pluto means right now. And again, going back to the thing about the nature of existence, it always has its own agenda, which oversees our agenda. So even if we don't understand something, this movement is taking us through a spectrum of time the way that it's supposed to be unfolding. But the first thing to remember about Pluto right now in regards to this idea, Pluto on some level represents our existential survival. It's not at all about comfort or harmony. It's just about pure instinctive survival, the survival instinct. This is why in modern astrology, it's been said Pluto is a higher octave of Mars. Mars also represents that. And if you think about it, true survival always requires false coherence to be dismantled. And that's because false coherence is not the truth, and what is not true will always collapse eventually. False coherence will eventually collapse the system from within. It's like everything will just implode eventually because it's not rooted in that foundational thing that's necessary for life to grow and to be supported. And this type of darkness that I'm saying that can become our question, why does this darkness have to take over the world for us to understand something? Sorry guys, my camera's tripping out. Okay. This darkness has to appear because when it comes to the order of life and the way that Pluto represents that survival instinct, instinct always precedes ethics. If you think about it, a person who's hungry and their family is hungry, and our social contract and our ethic is that thou shalt not steal, the rule will not apply. And this kind of darkness again appears because power in itself, at its core, always precedes every kind of ideology. Ideology is merely a way to claim the power. And survival in itself always precedes agreements. How many times have we heard in history of humankind that an individual or a group of people sacrificed another for their own benefit? We're seeing this in the West. As someone who migrated as a political refugee coming on this side of the world, I became aware of this very early, that we have the comfort that we have in the West because we've taken it from the East. As been said in the post-colonial theories, a lot of migration happens because the colonist is in that person's country of origin. And that's why I'm saying survival always precedes agreements. Pluto is always going to force us to go beyond the consensus, to go deep underneath it. This is the god of the underworld. And it's doing that. It's bringing this darkness because it wants us to see it before it metastasizes, which jeopardizes existence. And this becomes especially important in the sign of Aquarius, because what shapes reality in the sign of Aquarius are ideas. And ideas, specifically, that we hold collectively, become the infrastructure of society and our own personal lives. We think we're an individual and we're showing up to our relationship. But all of our dynamics have these social roles. They're ideas that we're performing half the time. And if that idea is corrupted, all the structures that are built upon it become by nature destructive. So Pluto brings this very distinct and explicit darkness to the surface, and it's doing it before the damage becomes irreversible. And this is why Sun's conjunction right now matters so much in this process of revelation. And that's because the Sun illuminates, Pluto reveals. So together, they're making it very clear for us, if we pay attention, who's benefiting from all the things that are happening in our personal life and on the global stage. Who's controlling what? How much of this is actually over control? Not the benefit of society, not for humanitarian reasons. And in the process, who's being silenced? And who decides who gets what, who gets to speak, who remains in power and who does not? And what is that saying about the very structure of power in itself? So what they're doing together at this moment, Pluto still has a long way to go. At this moment, it's more about excavation, revelation, than about annihilation. And part of this revelation is making the impersonal very personal for us. Hence, again, having Venus, Mercury, Sun, and Mars going here, not Saturn and Jupiter. And we have to remember, any kind of an excavation, let's say you want to mine for something, it's always disruptive and destructive before it becomes something productive. So once when we understand why this darkness is appearing at this point in history of humankind, we can finally ask the most important question, which is what I was saying earlier. We're purging, we're creating this vacuum, this vast, big, dark space. But what is to be built? What's to come in its place? We also have to ponder this. And I keep saying in other videos, we're entering this era of air and fire, and everyone wants to make this about doom and gloom, that technology is going to take over or what have you. But we need to have intelligent and decisive, intelligent the air element and decisive the fire element of understanding how to rebuild where things are being destroyed. With technology, let's say employment, income, meaning. We need to understand those components. With shift in power dynamics, removing government, starting these wars, creating these vacuums, what comes after? What is the meaning of all of this? We have to ponder this. We need that air element and that intelligence to understand and to create new meaning also. And I'm saying this because you can't be a human being, live in society, and live in the ruins of a structure. We as human beings create structures because we actually need them. We need them to have a coherent, continuous, and a functional life, to create that system, that centralized notion that is the sun as the organizing principle creating life. So there are so many lessons unfolding in this moment. It's actually overwhelming. But let's get to some of the life lessons of this moment. And I would say these lessons will unfold themselves in over a decade, but the time has come for us to have these questions or these ideas at the forefront of our minds. And the first lesson, I would say, for humanity is how to have sovereignty on an individual and a collective level without domination. And I say this because this is occurring in the sign of Aquarius. And Aquarius doesn't support personal tyranny. I mean, the sun is in its exile in Aquarius. If we were to have tyranny, it would actually happen in the opposing sign where the monarch is sitting. Aquarius wants collaborative effort. And as I was saying earlier, whenever a planet comes into a certain sign, they have to obey the script that the sign hands over to them, and they have to just play the role according to the rules of that sign. And even Pluto is not exempt from this. So in a lot of ways, Pluto's job right now is to destroy personal tyranny, tyrants of the world. Authority has to come from alignment of principles that are real and truthful. It can't come from pure coercive power and control over others. And again, because this is in a sign of Aquarius. The second lesson I would say is to have integrity under pressure. And that's because when power dynamics intensify, the temptation to compromise truth for safety is one of our instincts as human beings because we have the drive to live, the drive to survive. But this is survival without integrity, which again is corrupting the whole system, which then is jeopardizing every life. And Pluto, because again, it's in the sign of Aquarius, it's going to punish that compromise. Pluto is saying only that which can withstand exposure can survive. The third lesson that Pluto's trying to bring is to understand what collective responsibility means. And again, especially this year with the personal planets making the impersonal personal. This transit right now, this year, Pluto in Aquarius is teaching us that systems are not so abstract and far away from you. They live in your living room. They live inside of your head. It's showing us how systems are actually made of people and their own personal integrity or lack thereof is affecting so many lives. It's asking us to see these people who are in a position of power, if we are in a position of power in some sphere of life, do we actually uphold or tolerate corruption, corrupt attitudes, corrupt behaviors, corrupt ideologies? Pluto is showing us, for those of you who are saying, I am not political, that the politics of the day don't matter and don't do anything to me, your neutrality is anything but protection of the self or the other. It's actually participation in the corruption. In some ways, Pluto is making all of us into an organic activist because it's touching some aspect of our lives. With some of us is going to be the employment issue. With other people is the geopolitics that's affecting their personal lives, economies. If we have recessions, everyone's touched. So Pluto, again, that notion of the impersonal becoming personal this year. And I would say that the final lesson has to do with endurance through clarity. And I'm saying this because we're moving into that era of air and fire. The fire was actually inaugurated by Mars in the sign of Sagittarius in December. Now air has been inaugurated by Venus entering here first. And what that means in the era of air and fire, ideas are going to spread super fast. Actions are going to ignite quick, so quick that we can call them reactions, like becoming hair triggered to act. And without the excavation of Pluto first, the way that is happening right now, that speed could become very destructive. And I would say this is one of the reasons why Pluto was the first one from all the three outer planets that are moving into fire and air. Pluto was the first one to move into air, and it's Aquarius from all signs. And this is Pluto saying that the ground now needs to be cleared. Those foundations that are not in reality holding up anything, they need to be cleared. And Pluto's doing that before this acceleration happens. So what I want to say is that this is just another round of, again, the camera, of everything that's happening with Pluto. And we're getting close to the end of this video. And before closing, I want to say if you like this video, please do like, subscribe, and comment. I read every one of your comments and I try to respond to as many as possible. And I'll be back to talk about more in this sign. And if you guys want a reading of these transits in your own birth charts, because they always have a different meaning, they get very specific, you can go to the link in the description box below or again to parisayazdi.com for more information. And now to close this video. Sun conjunct Pluto in Aquarius. It's bringing consciousness to all of us to understand what's been holding power, what actually has power, what actually maintains the coherence of our life, and what can allow continuity. And in its realist, most truthful form, any kind of falsity that might be there, Pluto is just destroying and just layer by layer, just ripping them off. And by the time the sun gets out of here this year, some centers of power will be exposed where they do not correspond to this notion of truth, the foundational thing, the foundation of power, power in its essence. And that's because Pluto right now wants us to see everything from inside out, bottom up. It wants things that were hidden to not be hidden anymore. Pluto right now is an agent of revelation, but in Plutonian way. And again, to put this in a bigger context of the stories that are happening in 2026, we have that phase of fire and air. And Pluto is letting us know the way things have been operating cannot continue to operate that way. And I want you guys to realize this world that we're living in right now was made in post-World War II in a lot of ways. And Pluto at that time was in the sign of Leo. Now it's on the other side. It's saying that old narrative cannot work in this new world. So a lot of this destructive power has a lot to do with that too. A topic for another video. But in general, Pluto's saying right now, what can't survive being seen? The element of fire. What can't carry intelligence forward? The element of air. What collapses under pressure? cannot be trusted in the future, especially with the speed of things happening. The influence and the reach that we'll have, the current structures cannot support it. So right now, this conjunction and everything that's happening in the sign of Aquarius is the precursor for the kind of setup we do need in the future. And next, we're going to have Mars here, and there will be a video on that because one of the most intense conjunctions in astrology is Mars and Pluto. And Mars is not going to be asking, oh, what's legitimate or what's not. Mars is going to act on what's already been revealed. Sun was kind of exposing the center, revealing it, illuminating it. Mars is going to test whether if that center can withstand force. And anything that relied on concealment, moral leverage, or restrained aggression, when Mars enters into the picture, because Mars brings with itself a lot of force and even violence. And in finishing this video, I'll leave you with this. May we have the clarity to see where power truly operates in our lives and the steadiness to stand where integrity lives. And that's it for today. Sending you guys much love. Till next time.